Today I'm out in North Carolina with the 2022 Volkswagen Jetta GLI. For 2022, the Jetta gets a number of tweaks. The base engine goes up to a 1.5-liter turbo borrowed out of the Volkswagen Taos. The GLI gets the same engine as before, but both models get a number of exterior and interior tweaks to help keep it fresh, and of course help this GLI continue to compete with the likes of the upcoming Honda Civic Si. In this video, we're going to be taking a look at specifically the GLI, but if you want to know more about the 2022 Jetta, stay tuned because I'll have that in a separate video coming up soon. The first thing VW did for 2022 was freshen the exterior. We get a new front end look with LED headlights, slightly different grille. We still have a red accent there because this is the GLI, and then distinctive red accents down here at the bottom of the bumper. There have been points in the history of the Jetta and the Golf where they were closely related to one another, but with this generation of the Jetta, this is no longer directly related to the 2022 Volkswagen Golf. There are definitely some common architectural components, but it's not simply the sedan and the hatchback variant of the same vehicle. And oddly enough, the Jetta is no longer sold in a wide variety of countries around the world. It's essentially North America and China at this point. The reason the Jetta isn't offered in every country around the world anymore is because sedans quite simply aren't as popular as crossovers. And that's why the bulk of Volkswagen sales at the moment really are crossovers. But they have remained dedicated to the Jetta and the Volkswagen Golf in North America. It's worth noting that 2022 is the last year for the Passat, so if you want a VW sedan that's bigger than this, your only option going forward is going to be the more style-forward Arteon. Dimensionally, the Jetta is still towards the larger end of the compact sedan segment. We have lots of rear seat legroom, lots of rear seat headroom as well. So one big reason that you might want to get this over something like the Civic Si is rear seat headroom. For 2022, Volkswagen has simplified their lineup considerably, and aside from choosing manual or automatic transmission, the only real option on the Jetta GLI is the optional black appearance package. Changes to the rear end are a little bit more subtle than the front. We still have the GLI badge right there, two big exhaust tips down there at the bottom, and a subtly different lower bumper treatment versus the regular Jetta. Regular versions of the Jetta get an upgraded engine with a little bit more horsepower and a broader horsepower and torque curve, thanks to a 1.5-liter turbo that replaces the old 1.4. But Jetta GLI models make do with the same 2-liter 4-cylinder engine that produces 228 horsepower. This is a little bit more power than we find in the Civic Si, and definitely a little bit more power than we find in the Hyundai or the Kia alternatives. And the amount of power that we've found in the GLI has always been a separator between this and some of those less expensive alternatives in the compact sedan segment. As before, the engine is mated to your choice of a 6-speed manual transmission or a 7-speed dual-clutch automatic transmission. The 7-speed dual clutch is going to be the fastest to 60 and the most fuel efficient. Another feature that separates the GLI from the Forte and the Elantra on the less expensive side of things is the limited slip differential that is standard on all GLI models. That's really going to make the difference. If you're coming out of a corner, you're going to get less torque steer, you're going to get more traction, faster exits from that corner, and in inclement weather, this is going to feel much more sure-footed. It still doesn't have all-wheel drive. If you want all-wheel drive in a compact performance Volkswagen, you have to get the Golf R. But it is going to give you added traction for those inclement weather situations and definitely a better performance feel. Front seat comfort is good for a compact sedan in America, and this seat is about as adjustable as most of the competition. It's worth noting that even though this is a multi-way power driver seat with a 3-position memory, we don't have 4-way lumbar support, and the seat bottom cushion does not separately adjust for tilt. It simply tilts as the seat bottom cushion goes up and down. We have a tilt telescopic steering column with a large range of motion, and a passenger seat that does not have the same range of motion as the driver's seat. It is still a manual design in this vehicle. A big reason to buy the Jetta over the competition continues to be rear seat room. And I'm not talking about the enormous amount of legroom back here. I have about 6 inches. I'm mainly talking about headroom. Most sedans in America really have a slammed profile back here, more coupe-like, like we're seeing in especially sportbacks and liftbacks, but that's not what we see in the Jetta. It still has a pretty upright profile, and that means that I can put my head back here towards the headrest. Well, my head is touching the ceiling, but I don't really have to crane awkwardly to one side. And if I'm sitting in a more natural upright sitting position where my head is not back there on the head restraint, then really just my hair is touching the ceiling. There's also a little bit more width across the rear bench than we find in some of the competition, but keep in mind this is still a compact sedan. So obviously something like a Volkswagen Tiguan could have a little bit more room in the back seat if you're wanting to put child seats back there. Behind the trunk lid, we find 14 cubic feet of cargo space and one of the deeper trunks in this segment. So depending on the size of your roller bag, you can just about put a 22-inch roller bag in this position and still close the trunk lid if you really, really need to. Because of the squareness of this cargo area, you can see I can put a 22-inch roller bag in this position, and I have about 4 inches of cargo room on top left. This is a very versatile cargo area, and actually more practical than many mid-size sedans. Under the load floor, there's definitely enough room for a full-size spare tire if you wanted to put one in yourself. There's a temporary spare tire included with the GLI, which is definitely a nice touch. Subwoofer right there in the middle, and I suspect the subwoofer would still fit in here if you put a full-size spare in there. As we look around the interior, you'll notice that most of the buttons and switches feel like the last generation Golf, not the new 2022 Golf, because as I said before, they're not quite on the same development cycle. Height adjustable shoulder belts for the driver and front passenger, and two-way adjustable headrests are in this model. The leather upholstery has a lot of red accents, including this really cool red highlighting right there in the perforations of the seat. You can see that the inside of those holes are red, and then the actual leather seat surface is the same charcoal as the rest of the seat. Front seat bolstering is not as aggressive as some new versions of the Golf, but they're definitely comfortable and help keep you in place. I had no problem with my size fitting comfortably in the seat. The seat bottom cushion and back cushion are perforated because these seats are both heated and ventilated. If we go over to the front doors and zoom in on this trim, it's a really cool design. I love what Volkswagen has done here. It sort of looks like wood, but it's really not necessarily trying to be. It's just horizontal stripes there with some red accents that match the red accents on the interior. It gives this interior a really premium and warm feel that surprised me. I really like this. I didn't know what to think of it in initial pictures, but in person I think it looks pretty good. Moving back to the driver's door themselves, we find a decent percentage of soft touch materials. Soft touch upper there, soft touch middle section, and a soft touch armrest, but also harder plastics below to help improve durability. The bulk of the dashboard design is the same as last year. Soft touch injection molded upper section. Again, that trim panel that I showed you earlier. Large bin-style glove compartment. I had no problem fitting a large tablet computer inside there. Then in the middle of the dashboard, we have the touchscreen infotainment system. This is not running the absolute latest version of Volkswagen's infotainment software because we still have physical buttons on the side and touch buttons, and then separate climate control controls, which you don't find in the new Volkswagen Golf. There's a direct access button to the app system. That's app integration right there. Direct access buttons to things like car settings as well. Zooming out from there, we have two large air vents below that area. Hazard light button there, the controls for the dual zone automatic climate control system, two USB-C inputs. The ports have a high power output capability. I had no problem charging modern smartphones as well as cameras from that port. 6-speed manual shifter right there. A few auxiliary buttons around the side like the drive mode button, engine start stop button over there. 12-volt power port. Two big cup holders, definitely a different design than we find in the new Golf. Also a slot where you can put a smartphone. Padded center armrest right there, and that opens to reveal pretty decently sized storage cubby. The storage area is definitely bigger than the one that we find in the Golf, but the armrest does not ratchet in the same way as some compact Volkswagens do. On the driver's side, we find a large LCD instrument cluster. It's not quite a full LCD because the engine temperature gauge and the fuel level gauge are actually not part of the LCD itself. But this is definitely one of the best features in the Jetta. This is standard on every model, including the absolute base model with the smaller engine. Volkswagen's LCD instrument cluster is one of the best because it is so configurable. This doesn't offer all the same functionality that we find in modern Audi displays, but it's honestly pretty close and definitely does a lot more than the new LCDs that we find in the Honda Civic. Volkswagen has also modernized this 3-spoke steering wheel. This is basically the same one that we find in the GTI. There's a split bottom spoke with red accents right there. Big aggressive sport grips. They pop out right down here at the bottom of the steering wheel, then they pop inside the wheel up here just above the spokes. If you get the dual clutch transmission, there'd be paddles on the back, but obviously this one's the manual, so we don't find them. Over here on this side, we have the controls for the adaptive cruise control system, and you can change gears while the adaptive cruise control is engaged. That's a feature that I like. These buttons over here mainly relate to that multifunction LCD instrument cluster. There's also a voice command button, and then Volkswagen separates track forward, backward, and volume up, down. Now these buttons are touch buttons, so you can slide your finger across the volume button here. You can slide your finger across track forward, backward as well. And these button modules, they really only click in once. So what actually you've selected depends on where your finger is as you're clicking down on this particular button module. This definitely works better than Honda's first attempt at touch buttons, but I kind of wish they had stuck with just physical buttons. Now let's get the GLI out on the road. Obviously 0 to 60 is about the same as last year because we have a dual clutch transmission or a 6-speed manual, just like we had last year, and we have the same 2-liter turbo engine under the hood as last year. You're going to go faster 0 to 60 with the dual clutch like I'm driving right now, and that's probably why this is the most popular transmission, but it's going to be more engaging obviously with the 6-speed manual. And thankfully I have had the opportunity to drive both transmissions out here in North Carolina. I've got to say that I'm really glad that Volkswagen has kept the Jetta around in the US, at least for now, and has given us a GLI as well, because the Jetta is not available in very many world markets at all. Compared to mainstream performance crossovers, which we're starting to see more of around the world and in the United States as well, this has a lower center of gravity and perhaps a bit more of a grown-up feel than something like the Hyundai Kona N. The Kona N is going to be not too far off this in terms of price tag. It is going to give you more power and a more compact form, but this has again, a more grown-up feel to it. It feels a little bit more Germanic in terms of the steering, has a really precise feel to it, a really great feel as well. It's very direct, but there's not a lot of feel coming back from the front tires. You can blame, of course, electric power steering for that. The lower center of gravity versus a lot of those crossovers out there means that handling is absolutely excellent as well. This is the only version of the Jetta to get a fully independent suspension in the United States. If you get the regular Jetta, then you get a torsion beam suspension in the back. And you will definitely notice the difference when the road starts to wind. This suspension doesn't become upset over broken pavement. It is an awful lot of fun, and the rear end of the Jetta is very, very planted. Really aiding in the handling and defining the character of the GLI is the adaptive suspension system that this model has on it. This is essentially the same adaptive suspension system that we find in the GTI. Obviously, it's been tweaked a little bit for use in the Jetta. What I really love about the suspension system is that it's very well tuned even in comfort mode. It doesn't feel too floaty-boaty. I think the spring rate is just about right. So if you're looking for something that is definitely comfortable for your daily commute but can firm up when you want it, that's exactly why you should get this particular model. It's worth noting that I have spent the vast majority of my time in the GLI so far in comfort mode. If you do want things to be a little bit firmer, you could put it in sport mode, but I think comfort mode is actually a really great blend, and it goes with the personality of the GLI, as does the excellent limited slip front differential. The limited slip differential really differentiates the GLI from the average compact sedan in America and even a decent number of the performance competitors. This has a really great feel to it, and earlier today out here in North Carolina it was pretty drizzly, and it was really obvious that the limited slip differential helps you put the power down, whether you're on your favorite winding mountain road like this or you're just trying to enter the freeway. It's also going to pay dividends for folks that live in areas with inclement weather. In snow, ice, sleet, etc., this is going to be an awful lot more sure-footed than your average front-wheel drive vehicle. Obviously, not as sure-footed as something like the Golf R with all-wheel drive, but definitely pretty close. As always, if you want to know all of the performance scores for the GLI, you're going to have to wait until I can get my hands on one of these at home and run it through the usual battery of tests, but don't expect the character of the GLI to have changed too much since the last time that I drove this model. This is still very competitive, but keep in mind we are going to be getting an all-new Honda Civic Si and shortly a new Type R as well. If you haven't already done so, be sure and hit that subscribe button down there at the bottom of your screen, because I will be driving the all-new Honda Civic Si within the next few weeks, so shortly after this video is posted, you should expect to see that video coming up as well. Cabin quietness may not be the highest on your priority list, but if you are looking for a slightly quieter cabin, the GLI is quieter inside than the GTI, both in terms of wind noise and in terms of road noise and the exhaust drone. I suspect that has to do with the fact that we have a real trunk back there. And remember, in any kind of hatchback or crossover type vehicle where the cabin and the cargo area are one space, you have less sound isolation, and so the cabin noise scores are generally going to be a little bit louder. As far as fuel economy goes, in real world driving, you're probably going to get the best fuel economy with the dual clutch transmission, but again, if you want the fun factor, you might as well select the 6-speed manual. Bottom line, the GLI is a lot of fun, and I love the tweaks that Volkswagen has made. Although they don't specifically change the driving enjoyment of the vehicle, the new steering wheel design feels very modern. It's the part of the car that you're interacting with most every day. And then of course we have the standard LCD instrument cluster, which really helps separate this from some of the competition. Now we do see a full LCD instrument cluster in the Honda Civic Si, and of course the Honda Civic itself, but I like the one here in the Volkswagen a little bit better. This is a bit more Audi-esque, I guess you'd say, in terms of its general design. For 2022, Volkswagen has simplified Jetta pricing, especially the Jetta GLI pricing. This one started at $30,995, and on this particular model, it simply has the addition of the black package, which is $595, gets you some of the black accents that you see around the vehicle. You can also option into the dual clutch automatic transmission, but aside from that, everything that you've seen is standard. And that's really the biggest story for 2022, is that Volkswagen is doubling down on Jetta value. Something like the Hyundai or Kia alternatives may be a little bit less expensive than this starting, but they're not going to have the same level of feature content. And I also think that they don't have the same level of specialness that we find in the Jetta GLI. Coming up soon is the Honda Civic Si, but I don't have any pricing information on that model just yet. And actually at this point in time, I don't exactly know how much power it's going to be producing either, but Honda will be releasing some of those details after this video has been filmed. One thing we're very unlikely to see in that upcoming Civic Si would be any sort of automatic transmission like we do find available in the Jetta GLI. And for me, that really means that this is the more practical vehicle as far as daily driving goes. Not only is the dual clutch transmission going to be easier to drive on your daily commute, it's going to be faster 0 to 60 and get you better fuel economy. No, it is absolutely not going to be the most dynamic drivetrain to choose from, but if you want that, you can still get the manual transmission in the Jetta if you want to as well. The key difference, of course, is that Volkswagen gives you the option of selecting whichever transmission you prefer, and Honda's going to stick you most likely with the traditional manual transmission. This is also going to be roomy, fun to drive, and they've definitely helped keep it more modern on the inside. I was a little bit suspicious that the relatively minor interior changes would make it as fresh seeming as it feels, but actually they have worked pretty well. This does not have Volkswagen's absolute latest infotainment software, but you wouldn't really notice that because we have that large digital instrument cluster standard in all Jetta models, and it really does work well in the GLI. Be sure and let me know what you think about all that down there in the comment section below, and of course, check out my videos on the GTI and of course the Golf R that I've also shot out here in North Carolina. And stay tuned because I will have a first drive video on the upcoming Honda Civic Si just as soon as possible. I'll see all of you later. In the meantime, check out the merch store at AOAmerch.com, Facebook.com/AlexNautas, Instagram, all those other social places. We'll see everybody next week.